one, and we're going to do all this rigorously throughout the semester. Let me just start with one casual example, okay? Let's think about the development of the iPod. Okay, let's cast our minds way back, way back to the development of the iPod. Okay, now when the iPod, when Apple was thinking about making the iPod, they had to ask, would consumers want this? So consumers had to decide, given their limited resources, given the fact that they were buying a certain set of things, would they be willing to forsake some things they were already doing to spend the money on the iPod? Okay, it was a non-trivial amount of money. Would they be willing to forsake things they're already doing, okay, to spend money on the iPod? And clearly they were. Clearly consumers were willing to spend money, to spend a lot of money to get an iPod. They were originally, what, $300 back, you know, when $300 meant something. Okay, so basically, so what the firm will do is they'll say, okay, we get a signal from the consumer that they're willing to pay money to get the iPod. They're willing to pay a high price to get the iPod. Now, the firm will say, well, should we make iPods? Well, that will depend on what it costs to make them. So we have to then assess what are the inputs that we'll need to make an iPod. Well, to do that, we have to look at the prices of the various inputs that we'll need, of the chip and the metal and all the other stuff that goes into the iPod. Okay? So they can shop across different countries for different kinds of chips. They can look at different kinds of monitors, etc. But once again, what they'll do is they'll use the prices of those different inputs to decide how to produce the iPod. So whether to produce the iPod will depend on the price people are willing to pay for it. How to make the iPod will depend on the prices that firms have to pay for the chip and the casing and all the other things that go into the iPod. Okay? And then finally, who's going to get the iPod? Well, they're going to make a certain amount. What decide who gets them? Well, the person who gets them is the people who are willing to pay the price that Apple decides to charge. Some people are willing to pay that price. They're going to get an iPod. Some people are not willing to pay that price. They will not get an iPod. So the price in the market will ultimately decide who gets the iPod as well. Okay? So basically, prices will determine what gets produced, how it's produced, and who gets the goods that are produced. Okay? Of course, this is a very, very simplified example, as you can already tell. There are lots of cases where prices don't decide these things. So my favorite example is the fact that there are lines for hours to get tickets to see a Lady Gaga concert. Okay? Now, if it's really true that prices determine everything, we shouldn't see any lines. It should just be that those who are willing to pay the most to see Lady Gaga should, those who want to see the most to get a Lady Gaga should get the tickets. Those who aren't willing to pay shouldn't get the tickets. Why should there be a line? Not to mention the fact that people shouldn't be willing to pay anything, but that's a different issue. That's a taste issue. We'll come to taste later. Okay? So basically, clearly, this is not working perfectly. If the world worked in the way I just described, then what should happen is there should be essentially an auction, and whoever's willing to pay the most for Lady Gaga tickets would get them, and whoever's not willing to pay wouldn't, and it wouldn't involve any waiting in line or other things. Now, what's very interesting is we've actually seen an evolution from my youth to your youth towards the economic model. When I was a kid, if you wanted, so then it was Cars tickets, okay, to date myself, okay, you had to go and camp out at 3 in the morning outside the store where they're selling them to get the tickets. Now, of course, you don't do that anymore. Now you go on StubHub or Ticketmaster or these other secondary sellers, and there are prices that determine it. So increasingly, how many people actually, how many people have waited online to get a concert ticket? Okay, that's amazing. So if I asked this question 30 years ago, 90% of the hands would have gone up. Okay? So what that means is the price mechanism has started to be used, has replaced the line mechanism as a way to allocate those tickets, and we see prices working. That wasn't true. There wasn't StubHub. These weren't these secondary ticket sellers 30 years ago. You had to wait online to get the tickets. Now, so that's basically sort of an overview about sort of an example of how we think about the role of prices. Now let me draw a couple of important distinctions, terms I'm going to use this